Hello gamers, Powered Heal here, and today we are bringing you the Shaman Deep Dive. So this is going to be basically the same format as the other deep dives with maybe a bit of changes in the beginning, which I'll talk about in a second, but we're going to try and go over a bit of leveling, both spec and kind of like what to actually do during leveling, and then we're going to talk about endgame in terms of dungeons and raids, what the best spec is, and this is all going to be from a healing-centric point of view. Now, I will be fully honest with you guys, full disclosure, that Shaman is by far the class that I have the least experience with. I don't want to say necessarily overall, because I have played them at endgame a decent amount, but with leveling especially, like this class, I just basically just play enhancement and send it, and that's how I leveled with these. There's not really much optimization that I had. Granted, we are only talking about the first 25 levels, so it shouldn't be that difficult for me to kind of give you like some basics, but again, if you're looking for like a super sweaty min-maxed Shaman leveling 1 to 25 guide, this is not going to be the place where you find information on that. However, like if you do stay tuned at the end of the video, I feel like the analysis on the healing portion will be pretty good. So I think I have some good insight there, but just in terms of leveling, it's not really something that I specialize in on this class. I think how we're going to break it down is we're mostly going to try and talk about some of the new stuff and see how it can like theoretically maybe work in and boost your leveling experience depending on when you're going to get it. So I think starting out, it's like, you know, what spec do you do? And back in the day, or I guess like the last time I did this, I basically did something like this, where you're working towards two-hand, because the idea is at some point you're going to get Wind Fury, right? And so you're kind of like building that baseline already, and then this is just to have like quicker movement, right? Because it reduces the cast time of the Ghost Wolf, which is like your movement thing. And then, you know, you can pretty much go anywhere from here. You can buff your totems and start putting points in here. You can put points in here, points in here, depending on what you want, right? Because as you can see, like just getting to the next threshold here doesn't really allow you to do much. So if you really wanted those extra points, like here or something, if you're finding you need to heal a lot during combat, or just put them in something else, you could absolutely do that. And it's not the end of the world, but that's the typical way that I would level a Shaman to 25 prior. Now, there's interesting runes that may make Elemental a bit more interesting early on. Typically, from what I've seen, Enhancement is the way to go with Rockbiter up until like around level 40. And then I continued with Enhancement after that point. Well, obviously you transition to Wind Fury when you get it, right? But yeah, I continued with Enhance after that, but apparently the best way to level a Shaman is after that is to go Elemental. So typically Elemental is not seen as the early game thing, but with some of the runes, there may be options for this. And I think you would probably just go damage, potentially do the fire totems here, maybe a bit of stuff like this. And then critical chance is always good, right? And the clear casting is always good. And yeah, I think it'd probably be... This is kind of interesting because I feel like they may be adding stuff to sort of facilitate this. So I'm not really sure if you just put the extra point in here, put the extra point in here. But like I said, I don't even know if this is really going to be viable. And we're going to take a look at the runes right now. And we're going to see what we can gather from those. We're kind of going to do this in the other order. So, dual specialization. This is kind of like an enhanced thing. I don't know how good this is going to be early. It does increase your hit baseline, so that's kind of good. Because typically if you were to get like a dual wield thing, you know, there may be certain circumstances where it doesn't increase your damage if your hit is like bad enough, right? Because Shaman has the option of going two-hand, but we have some hit to supplement this with, so maybe this is actually like the way to go now, right? And because we have dual will specialization, it's very possible that even the leveling spec no longer includes like two-hander or anything like that, but you would still go down the enhancement tree, I assume, right? So that part of it is probably still mostly correct. This is kind of interesting because just being able to kind of like double cast on some abilities is kind of nice. The thing is, the spells are cast with like no coefficient, I believe, but you know, and they cause like half damage, right? So just something to keep in mind there. Because they're instant, so I think that's why they don't really have a coefficient, or if they do, it's like a very weak coefficient. I'm not sure when we're going to get this though. And then even something like this could be kind of interesting. You know, if the other things aren't available, it may be worth picking this up, and you might have some kind of nice mana regen with the block, it seems like, potentially. So it could be kind of interesting. But again, not really sure what we're going to get, and not really sure what's the best. These, I have no idea, honestly. Oh, man. I've heard that Lava Lash is not looking good, but Lava Burst is. And I don't even want to spend too much time on these, to be honest, because I just don't know how these translate relative to other stuff. I mean, I think that the thing is that early the Shaman doesn't have a lot of buttons, right? It's kind of like the Paladin early on. You inevitably get Storm Strike, but you don't get it early. So anything sort of that's like an extra attack could potentially really help the melee Shaman, right? So I think, you know, using any of these that you get is probably not a bad idea early on, obviously. And then this stuff is kind of interesting. I think honestly, like this, if you do get it at some point, it just makes you tankier, right? It's not making you do insane damage or anything like that, but it's probably the better thing to level with here. If I'm checking out any of these, I would have to say. So yeah, it's I think that's probably pretty good, but I just don't know what level you're gonna get it at. If I had to guess, I'm kind of assuming that you might get one of these Lash melee attack spells earlier on. I just think that'll probably most likely be the case. So if there's going to be like the level 2 runes for everybody, it's probably going to be one of these three, and you are probably going to use that in your rotation early on, if I had to guess. So let's go to the abilities. And yeah, I think like early on, basically, you put Rockbiter on your weapon, and before you were basically autoing, Earth Shocking, and then like you could cast Lightning Bolt before the mob got to you. I think all that still sort of applies, except now you have a melee ability. So I think it's going to depend like how often you incorporate the ranged abilities here. It's just going to depend on like how much mana you can spare and stuff like that, and how much everything costs. I think one of those new strikes is probably going to be the most of your damage. This is obviously just passive damage that gets put on the weapon, right? So you're basically going to be using your strike, which is probably going to cost some mana. Let's see if it actually shows they have mana costs. Doesn't say, but they probably will have mana costs. We're unsure. And then you are going to just be hitting things with your Rockbiter, and then you're going to be Earth Shocking or whatever shock is kind of like appropriate. I think the Flame Shock does like the most damage, but it doesn't see. It's a fire spell, so that's why it's not listed here. But yeah, you would use like Flame Shock to do the most damage, but Earth Shock would do an interrupt. And the Flame Shock has to tick for its full duration, I'm pretty sure, to get like the max damage. Otherwise, the Earth Shock is probably just better. So that's something to keep in mind when you're using the shocks. And yeah, you're basically just going to be hitting stuff with a Rockbiter and probably your other melee special. And then if you have the mana, you're probably starting off the pull via Lightning Bolts and stuff like that at the appropriate level. And I don't really think much changes because you don't get any of the really good stuff until a bit later on, I believe, right? I think with Wind Fury like 30 or something like that. So yeah. I think it's honestly going to be relatively simple. I'm sure there's going to be ways to like uber min max it. We're not going to cover that here. But that is like your general guide that should get you through. Just like use what abilities they give you. Have Rockbiter on your weapon or weapons if you're dual wielding, if you end up getting that talent. And I would probably go enhancement earlier on, would be my advice. So yeah, that's that. And we're going to move into the guide portion of the guide where I know a little bit more, and this should be a bit more thorough. So, what is going to be the spec at level 25, right? So, we'll just build this out together like we normally do, right? Obviously, this is just like a staple because improved, like having minus 5 seconds on your main bread and butter spell is super important. This is kind of nice. You get ancestral healing. This is basically the same thing as like the priest's ability. It's like inspiration or something like that. But the placement is kind of like much better because I guess the priest one is fine as well, but you're not really competing with a ton here. So it's kind of nice. Then you have interesting options past this point, right? So this reduces the mana cost of your healing spells. This is totems. And this is your reincarn, right? So typically, I am trying to go like a mana efficient here. I'm not planning to be recarning a ton, so I probably wouldn't put points in those. But it's not necessarily terrible, but I think it's just better to put points in here. And the real question is like, do you want 5% of your healing spells or 25% of your totem? So let's just we can actually take a kind of a look at this, right? Because we're going to have some totems at least. So let's say we'll look at the max rank, Strength of Earth totem. Okay. So totem cost is 65 for rank 2, right? So 25% of this, 65 times 0.25 is 16.25 mana, right? So 65 minus 16.25 is 48.7. So we have 48.7 mana cost to drop this totem now. So we're gonna actually just don't mind the data on top here, but we're just gonna put this in here. That's why I put the little separator line. So 48.75. Okay. And then, so we saved 60, and we're going to say we saved 16.25 mana, right? And let's go and check out the other one. So, okay, reduces the mana cost of healing spells by 5, right? So we'll do a rank 5 healing wave just for parity here. So 200 mana and then 5%. So 200.05, right? So it's 10 mana. We're shaving off that, and we're at 190 essentially, right? So 190 and 10 mana. So when you look at this at first, you're like, oh, you save more mana putting down the totems, right? Which is true, but the realistic thing here is that you are going to be casting the heal a lot more than the totems. Now, granted, are you going to be casting this heal in particular? No, right? So you're probably not going to be spamming the max rank lesser healing wave. Although, to be honest, if you're going to use a lesser healing wave, the max rank one is kind of nice because it will let you maximize any regen you get. Unfortunately, shamans just don't get a lot of regen right from their 5-second roll thing, but it does still exist, and if there's nothing else going on, you might as well try and take advantage of it. So that's something to keep in mind there. But even if you drop this, you're still going to be casting more heals than you're going to be casting totems, typically, right? Because you'll cast like totems at the start of a boss fight or a trash pull. The one caveat here I will say is like if you're kind of speed clearing through something like BFD and you're dropping totems very often because you guys are just annihilating the trash and the trash pulls are not lasting very long, then it could be that could be a sign that you may want to invest more points into the totem mana cost reduction node, because it basically, like, from everything I've been hearing, the raid is going to have a lot of health. So I think that the fights, even on like trash, are probably going to be fairly long, but we'll have to see. And this is kind of like the frustrating part about trying to do this like beforehand, right? Or not necessarily frustrating, but we just don't know like how often you're going to be dropping these totems and stuff like that. So it's really hard to make a judgment call in cases like this. So I'd say this is one: be open with it, be flexible, and you can kind of like adjust your points as you see fit once you kind of like encounter the raid. But I think the healing is just probably generally going to be better, because there's going to be a lot of cases where I don't even think you really have that many totems, right? Like, I think this is going to be the main one. And then you have other elements here, but none of them are... Like, you might drop that and then the protection totem, right? So you may drop the Strength of Earth and then, like, protection totem or something like that. So you can get away with not probably having all your totems out, basically, right? And if that's the case, then this essentially is less valuable. So we're just going to put points in here for now. Oh, actually, I forgot. So you put a couple points in here. I always take this because it's just like makes things completely brain dead, right? You know, you have to think about it, which is generally pretty good. And then you have avoid interruption while casting. You have healing grace, or you have healing focus. Right now, I'm not taking this. I'm not taking this. Although I will mention something specific about this in relation to another rune a little bit later, but we're gonna like hold off from that for now. So yeah, I don't really need to be worrying about getting hit typically. I don't need to worry about threat. So basically it's a matter of, you know, do I want to finish out this and then put a couple points in here? But if you're gonna fill this out, then what you want to do instead is, this is increase maximum mana, right? Yeah, so it's only 5% though. So I think personally, I'm gonna do this and then just something to do with like 2 points in here. Or maybe you could even put a point in here and then a point in here. You get an extra % crit, right? Or you could put points in here, but I don't think that's going to make a big difference. I think a lot of these like last points aren't really that big. It's mostly just getting improved healing wave, improved astral healing, and then getting the totem node. And then once you have that, you know, basically like whatever else you put points in is basically going to be kind of irrelevant. Shamans don't have a super good point distribution here, I feel like, because this is nice and it is strong, but there's not really any mana regen. And although this is really nice, it's kind of like something that should probably just be baseline in for the class, not something you're actually investing a point in, right? So just something to keep in mind there. But this is basically like something around what I would do, and then you just put points in one of the other things. Whichever one you pick isn't really going to matter so much. So let's go into the Shaman. And so at level 25, it's kind of interesting because outside of the new spells that you have, you only really have like 2 other healing spells, right? Which is Lesser Healing Wave and Healing Wave. And basically, like, so you're going to notice that there's 2 versions of each healing wave. That's because this is accounting for the overload proc, is the idea. That's why you see this. So you always just go for the one with the cast time. But let's see here. It's 2 seconds. This is like sort of close to the Paladin's Flash of Light. If you actually look at it, it's 10 more mana, 0.5 seconds to cast. I think it's like a little bit more healing, but not a lot more. So it's strictly inferior, but it's just something to keep in mind that it is like sort of comparable in that sense. But all these, again, that are under level 20 suffer from no spell coefficient. So spell coefficient is basically just a way for the devs to filter how they want plus healing or plus damage to like affect different spells. So for example, if they want Chain Heal to be affected differently than Lesser Healing Wave, they give Lesser Healing Wave one coefficient, Chain Heal another coefficient. How the coefficient works is if the coefficient's 100, then the spell gets 100% benefit of the plus healing. If it's 50, it gets 50% benefit, and so on and so forth, right? So it's like really easy to understand there. The coefficient on Lesser Healing Wave is 0.44, and the coefficient on Healing Wave is like 0.84 or something like that. So that only really comes into play kind of with I would say that if you start getting gear from the actual instance itself and we start getting plus healing gear and stuff like that, we're not sure if that's really going to be the case. So it's something to think about, but it's not something I would really like dwell on right now, especially when you're going to be focusing on getting gear to go into the raid first, probably, right? Rather than gear you're going to be getting out of it and thinking about full bis. So just something to keep in mind there, though. And when you look at this, I mean, this is basically very similar to the Priest Flash Heal. And it's kind of like their mirror spell. And it basically covers the same use case, right? Where, like, you don't want to be spamming this typically. However, it's great to, like, catch back up on people with. It's great to spot heal with in a pinch. And it's great if you just need to pump out more HPS more quickly, right? But this is not like the Paladin Flash of Light, where it's actually like mana efficient. It's just not really. So it definitely is going to cost you to use this, but obviously has its uses. And then I think for the most part, you're probably going to be using like rank 4 Healing Wave, potentially some of the other ranks, but I think rank 4 is probably going to be a good place to start, and then rank 5 is always there. If you want something that's a bit chunkier, if you know that the healing is not going to get wasted, if you can be efficient with it, and especially if you have any sort of plus healing, like I said, from the raid, this one's going to be the one that is going to benefit the most, because after level 20, spells get their real spell coefficient, and prior to level 20, they basically have a terrible spell coefficient. So that's, again, like why you would use this over some of the other lower level spells, assuming you had a decent chunk of plus healing. Now, I would say the real problem with Shaman in this bracket is it doesn't really have the thing that makes it good, which is Chain Heal. However, there are a few interesting runes, right? So we're going to go back to the rune page really quick. The runes are on here, but I think it's easier to look at them here because they're by slot. So Healing Rain versus Overload, right, is going to be kind of like your selection here. And I think, honestly, that unless you have a specific fight where Healing Rain is like very useful, I kind of like Overload, because it's just you're getting free HPS for like no mana. It seems kind of very good. The percent chance that it procs is not really that low. And yeah, I mean, if you use like rank 4 Healing Wave or the max rank Healing Wave, it's going to be a fairly substantial chunk of healing that's getting added on, right? So I don't really think this is bad at all. the decision is just going to come down to, can this ability be used can you get a lot of value out of it? And let's just check the mana cost. Of course, we don't get a mana cost. Okay. So that's interesting. But again, like, this could be decent, but it kind of heals a bit slowly, right? And it requires people to be in range and actually stand in it, which is always a bit of a challenge to get people to do, even when they're dying. So it's just going to depend on, do we have a really good use case for this or not? And if not, you're going to take Overload. And Overload's kind of nice because it can really help your throughput. So this, you're obviously just taking Water Shield. Now, on a Paladin, I had just done my Paladin gear guide. Actually, I think... Okay, so this one hasn't filled out yet, but as you can see here, this is the Paladin one. And we have 180 int, and we have like 3k mana. So let's just imagine that we have similar to 3k mana. It probably won't be exactly the same, because Paladin gets like an int bonus thing, but we'll say 3k just for argument's sake, right? So 3,000. Okay. And then 1% of maximum mana per 5 seconds. So times 0.01. Oh. Huh. Yeah, I mean, that's like a kind of decent amount of MP5, honestly. That's not really that trivial. I mean, honestly, like, that's pretty good. Even from, like, a lower level, I would say that it's like almost double wisdom, right? At this level, so very interesting. Yeah, I definitely like that. People were saying that you'll be able to kind of like get infinite mana by triggering the shield, essentially. So you put on the shield and then you trigger it. I personally think that would be ridiculous if they allow that to happen. Like, my assumption is that you put the shield on, and in order for it should cost a lot of mana, and for it to get value, you want to have it on before the fight, and you don't want to be wasting your, your globes, basically. And the idea is that if you do get hit and you lose a globe, you get compensated for it. But I can't imagine that they want you to be intentionally taking damage to, proc the 4% mana restored on the globe, but I guess we'll see. To be determined on that one, right? And then the other thing I'm not sure about is it could be 1% mana per globe, which I doubt. But, because I think it would say, like, each granting. But if it is, like, per globe, that's just going to be insane. I don't even know, like, what to think about that. Imagine having 90 mana per 5, like, early on. That just sounds like insanely broken, right? So it basically can't be that, I think. So yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about that. But you're gonna take Water Shield regardless. It's gonna be good, right? And then let us look at the last one. Okay, so sorry about that. Here things get a bit interesting, right? Because Earth Shield is kind of like the ability that, you look at it and you just go, like, okay, like, this is the healing ability from here. Shamanistic Rage is kind of like okay as a personal, but I just don't really think you're going to need to have a personal based on the fact that a bunch of classes don't have a personal. So if this is like the only way, like, your shaman or whatever is surviving, or people are surviving, is using a personal like this, it's going to be kind of problematic because, like, only shaman has this, right? So it's kind of weird. I guess Alliance has, like, Barrier and Divine Sack, but on Horde you don't really have anything aside from Priest Barrier. So, because this is not AoE, Shamanistic Rage. So I don't think that this is going to be the way that you go, really. And then that basically leaves the choice between Earth Shield, which if you do take Earth Shield, I feel like it's pretty much just going to be like you keep this up on the tank at all times, and you try and it's just going to be like a mana efficient heal that's low cost, kind of like an extra button they're going to give you. So I think that's kind of what it's going to be. But the other interesting option here is Ancestral Guidance. So I feel like the real use case here is for the Flame Shock, where like you would Flame Shock something and then you're healing to convert it to damage onto the target. And depending on like how much, what I want to know is like, does this take into account overheal? Because if it does, it's kind of potent, right? Because it basically just allows you to do damage with your healing at any time that you want. Whereas if the overhealing is not there, then you have to be actually healing HP. And in most cases, you're going to want to try and be healing HP while doing damage, right? As that's obviously the kind of like the boon of taking this. But just having the ability to do it like regardless is pretty good, right? I think the first effect, 25% of your damage is converted to healing, is going to be good because you're going to be like doing damage presumably, although I don't know if it feeds back into itself. So for example, if you're just doing healing, causing your Flame Shock to do more damage, is that then going to spread the Flame Shock damage out, 25% of it, to healing up to 3 nearby party members? I'm not really sure, but regardless, I think even just for the damage aspect alone, it's always nice when a healer can kind of like contribute on damage on a boss. And this seems like it may actually be like a pretty meaningful contribution because it would allow you to potentially bypass like a boss phase or something like that, right? Where you're putting a bunch of healing out there and it's transferring a bunch of it to your Flame Shock and you're doing like just good damage with that. Maybe you push a phase or something that you wouldn't have if you didn't have this. And you can basically be doing this as like a pure healer, right? That just drops this when needed for those 10 seconds in a boss fight to get you out of that phase, to get you to something else. Which it does seem like these bosses are going to be a bit more involved, so there may be stuff like phases. So I think this has some really interesting uses, potentially, and I think that it's going to be more useful as the Shaman gets other stuff like Chain Heal, but I think it could still be useful now. So it'll just depend on like situations where this is good, like if this lets you like skip phases and stuff, gives the raid a lot more damage, then it's kind of good. If it's not really that meaningful and it's just a bit of extra damage, then it becomes a bit more pedestrian, and it's not exactly like something that you're going to be super stoked about. So that's basically the runes. I think I went over all of them. Oh, and I wanted to mention like that's where the Nature's Guidance thing would come in. But it's actually not, because you do healing to do the damage. So yeah, I guess that's a bit irrelevant actually. So yeah, I would just keep the general spec here. And yeah, I think Shaman, this might be a shorter video because there's just not really a lot to Shaman in this early thing because they don't have Chain Heal. And the problem is we just don't know like how good Healing Rain's going to be. Are they going to give us situations for it? Again, the good thing about spells like this and something like a 10-man is that it's easier to coordinate. But outside of that, I just don't really know if you're going to get a ton of situations. Same thing with Ancestral Guidance. Again, good in theory, but pragmatically, is it really going to have a super significant use case? And then Earth Shield, this is something that's just always going to be decent, but it's not groundbreaking, you know what I mean? And it's probably just going to be like an AFK, put this on the tank sort of deal. So yeah, there's not like a ton that I would really say. I think you're mostly going to be using rank 4 and rank 5 Healing Wave, and you're probably going to be like healing tanks to be honest. Especially, I think their roles are going to reverse a bit for Shaman on Horde, where now the priests kind of have access to the AoE, and the Shaman don't, aside from Healing Rain. So I think that the Shaman are probably going to be the tank healing bunch, where they're cancel casting the higher rank healing waves on the tank, and then you have the flash heal equivalent, to either help out with spot healing or to just catch back up on the tank or something like that, right? So I think Shaman's going to be pretty simple, but sort of limited in that respect. They are going to have kind of some nice mana regen from Water Shield, I think, almost no matter what way it functions. There's going to be something good coming out of there. So they could be one of the more durable healers in the early phase just because of that. But outside of that, I think the healing is going to be really simple. It kind of sucks they don't have a lot of like on-demand, hard-hitting AoE healing, which is kind of what they're known for, but we're going to get that in the next phase. So you're going to have to sit tight a little bit for that. Overall, I don't think they're a bad class. I think, again, depending on how useful Ancestral Guidance will be, that's like the real difference maker for this class, is like, if there's a lot of use cases where you can like skip phases or skip mechanics with Ancestral Guidance, like having one of your healers being able to pump out a bunch of damage, then, it's super valuable, right? But if there's not those type of things, then it's just not so valuable. So we will have to see. But yeah, that is basically the Shaman guide. If you have any questions or anything like that, please feel free to leave them in the comments. This one's definitely a bit shorter just because there's, I feel like, less to kind of go over here. You know what I mean? We're going to do the rest of the gearing guides next, and we'll try and get those out. We'll maybe combine some of those. I'm not sure how to handle it yet. And then we'll also probably try and do a gold guide before the game comes out. So thank you guys so much for your support, all the likes, the people subscribing, stuff like that. Please, if you like this video, give me a like, give me a subscribe, and turn on notifications, because I think that makes it easier for you to see more stuff coming from the channel. Right, so, and share the video, of course, obviously, if you liked it. If you didn't like it, no worries, no need to do anything. And I appreciate all you guys. I'm really looking forward to SOD. It's getting closer, basically close to like a day away. So it should be really fun. And I can't wait to get in game with you guys. So I will talk to you next time.